The sound of crunching metal echoed like a gunshot across the complex. Karen's luxury SUV groaned under the force of rising steel. Her voice, shrill and panicked, rang out from the other side of the fence. "What did you do to my car?" The hydraulic bollard, now firmly wedged through her undercarriage, stood gleaming in the daylight, like Excalibur buried in an AV-8 engine. 30 neighbors stood frozen. One teenager dropped his soda in slow motion. As for me, I just sipped out of my coffee, stared her dead in the eyes, and said calmly, "That's not a parking spot, Karen." But see, the real story didn't start with steel. It started with a petty parking space, a high horse, and a woman who thought her HOA title made her untouchable. 3 years ago, I moved into this townhouse complex after walking away from a high-stress job designing automated defense systems. I was looking for quiet, simplicity, peace. I chose the corner unit for one important reason. It had a city-approved emergency exit lane behind it. Not a driveway, not a shortcut, a lifeline. As an engineer who's seen what happens when people ignore safety protocols, I didn't take that exit lightly. I got it signed, paved, marked with bright yellow crosshatching. For over 2.5 years, not one person dared park there. Then, Karen moved in. Karen arrived like a storm cloud in yoga pants and a tennis visor. From the minute her moving truck blocked the emergency lane for nearly 3 hours, I knew she'd be a problem. I still gave her the benefit of the doubt. I introduced myself politely, handed her a laminated copy of the emergency access rules, even pointed at the bold signage, on the pavement and on the wall. She smiled, nodded, said, "Sure, whatever, thanks." That smile, that was my first red flag. The kind of smile that says, "I heard you, but I don't care." Karen didn't waste time laying her claim to the neighborhood. At her first HOA meeting, she nominated herself as vice president. She came prepared, with printed packets titled Neighborhood Betterment Plan. It had absurd line items, lawn color standardization, fence height limits, a complete ban on satellite dishes, and even a rule proposing 1 pet per household. Someone asked what gave her the authority. She just smiled and said, "I just care more than most people." I heard that line so many times it practically echoed in my sleep. Then it happened. The first time she parked her SUV in the emergency lane, right in front of my unit, I figured it was a one-time mistake. Maybe she didn't realize it wasn't a driveway. So I walked over, knocked gently, and pointed it out. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "I just needed to unload groceries. You should mark that better. It looks like a private drive." I gestured to the giant reflective sign, the cones, the city permit posted on my rear wall. She waved a hand and muttered, "Overkill." Those groceries took her 2 hours to unload. Her SUV stayed there until after dark. I let it go, just barely. But the next week, her SUV showed up there 3 more times. Each time I left a polite note, even printed out the municipal code that clearly explained emergency access violations. She ignored every one of them. So at a community brunch, I finally confronted her directly. I said, "Karen, that lane isn't just against HOA rules. It's a safety issue. You're putting lives at risk." She chuckled. "It's not that deep. No one's dying back here. You act like you're the fire department or something." The irony of that statement would hit her later like a brick. Then came the fire drill. The HOA had arranged it with the local station as a preparedness test. The fire engine entered the main gate, turned the corner, and stopped, blocked. Karen's SUV was parked squarely in the emergency lane again. The firefighters had to haul 300 feet of hose around the building just to simulate access. They muttered things I can't repeat in polite company. And Karen? She stood there sipping lemonade, completely unbothered. "Well," she said, "maybe next time they can use the front." The fire captain stared at her like she just insulted his entire bloodline. The next morning, Chief Mendoza from the department showed up at my door. Small guy, big temper. He didn't waste time. "If that SUV blocks the lane during a real emergency, someone dies. I'm not joking." He handed me a letter, an official recommendation. It urged me to install physical deterrence, retractable, city-compliant barricades. I looked at the paper, then looked out the window at Karen's silver SUV. Then, I opened my laptop. On my laptop, I pulled up a design I had shelved years ago, a private security prototype, sleek, stainless steel, hydraulic, silent, deadly, to anything heavier than a scooter. A retractable Bollard, programmable and fully legal. By the end of the week, I had every permit in hand. I contracted a local metal shop to custom cut the core components. Installation would take 4 days. Wiring, another 2. The control system would be remote activated from inside my garage. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Law, safety. But Karen, she wasn't done. The day the crew arrived to dig the trench, she marched out with a clipboard like she was General Patton. "Excuse me," she barked. "You can't dig here without HOA approval." I calmly showed her the city permits, explained it was a fire department recommended safety barrier. Her eyes narrowed. "So what, you're installing traps now? What if someone accidentally parks there and gets impaled?" I smiled. Then they shouldn't be parking in a clearly marked emergency exit. That night, I got an email from the HOA. It listed a half-dozen suspicious violations: tall grass, noise disturbance, unauthorized surveillance equipment, all complaints from one person, Karen. But what Karen didn't know? I had over 24 video recordings, every instance of her SUV blocking the lane, time-stamped, filed, backed by official complaints. I forwarded everything to city code enforcement along with the fire department's letter. Their reply? Proceed as planned. The next evening I stood in my backyard watching as the gleaming steel post was lowered into the ground. It was barely visible when retracted, but with one button press, it would rise like a fist from the earth. 3 seconds. That's all it took. And anything parked on it wouldn't be driving away. The morning after installation, the air felt still, like the calm before a storm. I stood at the back gate, sipping black coffee, staring at the thin seam where the hydraulic post now slept beneath the pavement. Sleek, subtle, lethal. The kind of engineering that doesn't show off. It just waits. And sure enough, down the road came Karen's SUV, glinting in the morning sun like a chrome-plated tank. She swung wide, rolled straight into the emergency lane, and parked. No hesitation, no glance at the fresh caution markers, not even a blink. She just parked directly on top of the dormant Bollard. Again, was it arrogance? Ignorance? With Karen, it was always both. But I didn't trigger it. Not yet. I wasn't looking for petty vengeance. I was waiting for the moment. Instead of confronting her, I slipped back inside, pulled up the live security feed, and watched. The sensor recognized her SUV. It was armed. One tap, and it would rise. But I waited, because Karen couldn't just leave it there. She had to make a scene. That was her nature. Later that day, while I was working in the garage, Greg, our spineless HOA president, walked up my driveway. He wore the same awkward grin people wear before saying something stupid. "Hey, Liam," he started fidgeting. "We've had some complaints about unauthorized construction behind your unit." I wiped my hands. "You mean the city-approved safety installation recommended by the fire department?" He coughed nervously. "Well, Karen says it's a hazard. She's concerned it's hostile, and some board members feel it might be excessive." I nearly laughed. A certified retractable safety device was the concern, not the woman parking in a fire lane. That was peak HOA logic. I handed him a laminated folder with all the permits and said, "Then tell Karen to call her lawyer. I'd love to walk them through city code." Word for word. Greg mumbled something about hoping we could all just get along and walked off like a man going into a hurricane with a paper umbrella. The next 2 days, Karen went nuclear. I woke up to a citation taped to my door, something about fence height violations. Then an email claiming my grass hue didn't meet HOA standards. And another one saying the color of my side gate clashed with community aesthetics. I nearly spit out my coffee reading that one. But I didn't respond. I was too busy putting the final touches on the sensor calibration. The system was now using weight sensors, heat signatures, and motion detection. I tested it over 30 times, flawless. Karen wanted a spectacle? Fine. I'd give her an audience. That audience arrived the following Saturday at the monthly HOA mixer. You know the type: lukewarm lemonade, passive-aggressive chit-chat, enforced neighborhood bonding. Karen was in her element, wandering around with her clipboard and sunglasses like she was the star of a reality show no one asked to watch. She gathered a small crowd of new residents and pointed in my direction. Some people, she said loudly, just don't understand community values. I smiled, flipped a burger, said nothing. Then, as if on cue, she strutted to her SUV and, with dramatic flair, parked it directly in the emergency exit again. This time she locked it, tossed the keys into her purse, and walked off like she'd just won a war. She wanted me to react. Instead, I walked inside, grabbed my phone, pulled up the feed. There it was, her SUV sitting squarely atop the Bollard. The lane was clear. No pedestrians, no pets, no risk. I waited 5 more seconds, then tapped the activation icon. What happened next was mechanical poetry. The Bollard rose silently at first. Then, resistance, a groan, a sharp metallic pop, and then a squeal of tortured suspension as the SUV lifted several inches off the ground. Transmission fluid sprayed, the axle twisted, and then silence. From across the courtyard, Karen's screams shattered the air. She bolted across the lawn, shoes in hand, shrieking about vandalism and sabotage. All eyes turned. Someone dropped a paper plate. Karen collapsed at the bumper, wailing, "Someone call the police!" I stood on my porch and said calmly, "Don't worry, Karen. The camera caught everything, including your 7th violation of city code." Minutes later, the police arrived. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, everyone watching. Karen pointed wildly at me, shouting, "He set a trap! A car-killing booby trap! This is an act of violence!" The officers looked puzzled. I calmly handed them the permits, the fire department letter, showed the signs, and the footage of Karen voluntarily parking in a clearly marked fire lane. One officer reviewed the documents, nodded, and said, "This might be the most legally documented Bollard in city history." Karen demanded they arrest me. They politely declined. Her SUV? Towed. What was left of it, anyway? It disappeared on the back of a flatbed, dripping fluids like a defeated gladiator being hauled off the battlefield. I leaned on the porch railing, sipping my tea. "Finally," I whispered. But deep down, I knew. Karen wasn't finished. For 2 days, she vanished. No flyers, no door complaints, no threats about lawn edging. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then, at the next HOA meeting, she exploded back onto the scene, arm in a fake-looking sling, dragging a stack of papers thicker than a lawsuit. She slammed them on the table. "I demand an emergency session. He's installed a lethal device. It's terrorism. It's assault." Yes, she used the word terrorism. Her packets were titled "Evidence of Assault and Unauthorized Military-Grade Equipment." She passed out blurry screenshots of the Bollard mid-rise, complete with red arrows and bold captions, like some daytime TV courtroom drama. She even printed out an article about landmines for comparison. At one point, she stood, stared straight at me, and said, "This man is dangerous. He's turning this neighborhood into a war zone." The room went quiet. Then someone snorted. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I waited, let it settle, then calmly presented every documented violation. The fire chief's letter, the footage city approval, emergency authorization permit numbers. Then I said, Karen's SUV didn't get crushed because of me. It got crushed because she believed the rules didn't apply to her. The Bollard did its job. The board murmured among themselves. A few members even thanked me for handling it without direct confrontation. But Karen wasn't finished. She slammed her fist on the table. "I want legal action, emotional damages, reckless endangerment. I can't sleep." Then, in a wild pivot, she proposed replacing the emergency lane with a community fountain. No real emergencies happened in years, she argued. That's when Greg, the HOA president, finally grew a spine. He leaned forward and said, "Karen, that lane is required by law. What happened to your car is your responsibility. You ignored warnings, permits, and basic common sense." He paused, looked around the room. "The board will not be suing Liam. In fact, we're lucky he followed code so precisely." Karen stood frozen. Her mouth hung open like a broken puppet. She tried to speak. Greg raised a hand. "Your complaints are officially dismissed. All of them." She stormed out of the meeting, sling flapping, face redder than a fire truck. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe we're done. But I was wrong. 2 days later, I found out she had filed a zoning complaint with the city, claiming I was operating a commercial-grade defense system in a residential zone. She even said I was testing equipment for a private security firm. It was so bizarre that the inspector called me, laughing. "Liam," he said, "we'll come by to check. But comparing a Bollard to missile defense, that's a first." The inspection went fine. The officer admired the design, said more homes should have one. Karen's claim? Officially marked, unfounded and retaliatory. But she wasn't done. That night, I returned from the hardware store to find people gathered near my backyard, spray painted in red across the emergency lane. "Murderer, parking enforcer." I checked the security cam. There she was. 3:14 a.m., hood up, spray can in hand, looking like a knockoff cartoon villain. I filed a police report. Karen was fined for vandalism and trespassing. Her rental car got towed the very next day for parking in another red zone, not even on the Bollard this time. Just regular no parking territory. It was like she was allergic to consequences. But something started to shift. Neighbors who'd stayed silent started speaking up. One by one, they shared stories about Karen's bullying, unfair HOA fines, threats over porch furniture, notes about unsanctioned flowers. A retired vet named Mr. Henderson even said she accused him of suspicious meetings, which were just poker nights. Even Greg, the HOA president, admitted Karen had pressured him into enforcing rules that didn't exist. A petition started circulating. Within 2 days, 75% of the complex had signed it, demanding Karen be removed from the HOA board for abuse of power. The vote passed, she was out, and then, quiet. No more HOA memos, no parking drama, no threats about fence alignment. She became ghostly, present but silent, watching, waiting. And then came the night that changed everything. A summer storm. Wind, howling, lightning flashed like camera bulbs in the sky. At 2 a.m., a transformer exploded on the east end. Smoke, darkness, panic. I ran outside, flashlight in hand. A faint plume of smoke rose from one of the back units. Someone screamed, "They can't get through!" A tree limb had blocked the front gate. Only one other way in. The emergency lane. I raced to the panel. Triggered the Bollard. It dropped instantly. Moments later, headlights tore through the storm. A fire truck roared down the path. EMTs leapt out, raced toward the smoke. They pulled out a woman, and a toddler with smoke inhalation. Neighbors stood silently, watching. One clapped. Another whispered, "Thank you, Liam." And then I saw her, Karen, standing behind her fence. Raincoat pulled tight. No clipboard, no makeup, no fury, just realization. She didn't say a word. The next morning, I found a small box on my porch. Inside, a store-bought cupcake, a typed note. "I was wrong, you were right." I didn't post about it, didn't brag, didn't gloat, just placed the box on the counter and went back to work. Sometimes wars don't end with banners and battles. Sometimes they end with bollards and cupcakes.